Hello and welcome to Color Multimedia Enterprises. My name is Luke, also known as Tienery, and this isn't really going to be a tutorial per se, but what I will be showing you is a variety of, let's say, um, how-tos, or to put, that's more of a term to use for lack of a better term really. Basically what this series is going to be about is me creating an editor using C# and WinForms. I'm not I'm going to be teaching you things, but not in the same format that I'm going to be teaching you how to do things like OpenFL games or anything like that. It's going to be an entirely different format. It's going to be a lot of things going on. So this isn't really going to be the same way that as I mentioned. It's not going to be the exact same format. So what is this going to be? Well, first of all, what I'm going to be doing is basically introducing you to WinForms and C#. Obviously, if you wanted to create a cross-platform GUI application, this is not the series to be looking at. So if you're looking for a cross-platform GUI series, then I would recommend WX Widgets. And the reason I say that is because WX Widgets is currently a very mature framework. I wouldn't use Qt personally because of licensing. WX Widgets is a lot more friendlier in that regard. But if you're okay with creating applications in just Windows, then WinForms is fine. That doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't use it, and that there's a reason why I use it, and that's because, again, like WX Widgets, .NET WinForms is pretty good, and Visual Studio has a fairly flexible license. Let's just say that it's not as restrictive as some, although you still have to be a bit careful nonetheless. But without further ado, let's get into this. Now I'm looking for a menu strip. Don't know why it took me that long. I think it was because I was talking and I didn't know what I was doing, so yeah, that kind of does get in the way of things. Now I'm just setting up the menus for this particular editor, which is basically going to be a 2D map editor as well as a few other things to help us create our RPGFL engine, which we are currently creating in a tutorial series in OpenFL. Now, I do apologize for the lack of videos coming out over the past week. I have been, let's say, ill. Not ill in the sense that I've been physically ill, I mean mentally ill. Something that we don't normally like to talk about, and that's especially true when people are ignorant about it. Yes, I'm talking about depression. Um, but apart from that, hopefully we will get something done. So I'm just gonna set up these menus. I'm not gonna be too long doing this. For the most part, all of these menus is just going to basically consist of being able to obviously open and save files, new projects and other such things like that. It's not too difficult, if I may be honest. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. I did not mean to create that. Delete that. No, not that. I meant the combo box here. There we go. Right. That there. I have never ever seen a combo box in a menu before. Ever. So why you would want to do that, I really don't know. I suppose it is hidden away. I've never seen it done before. except in this circumstance, but then it just gives you the editing tool to create a label. Weird. Anyway, so undo, redo, when I can finally type, cut, copy, paste, delete, find, replace. That's about it really. Let's just add a few separators there. So just basic, oh, and preferences at the bottom. Apple style. I actually prefer edit preferences, it makes more sense. Okay, view. So we're going to have full screen in here. So in RPGFL edit, we're going to have code editing capabilities, but it's not going to be sort of massive in the sense that we're going to have full-on H programming available. It's just going to be some sort of H script functionality. If you don't know what H script actually is, it's actually a parser used to parse H code. It's mainly an expression-based scripting language, well, or a subset of the H programming language in script form. That's pretty much what it is. And it just parses and interprets it. Maybe I'll do a tutorial on it at one point. But anyway, so view. Oh yes. So project pane. So that's going to be the pane where we see all of our contents within our project. We're going to have, let's say, an error pane where we view errors and stuff like that. Let's see, we'll have a properties pane as well. They're called panes for whatever reason, I really don't know why. I guess I got influenced by Microsoft in some way at some point. So in inserts, I actually don't know what to do with there. Is there even any point in putting that there? No, not right now. Project. So we're just going to have quick test here. I'm not going to bother adding shortcuts or bitmaps or anything like that right now because that's just pointless. Test. Build. Libraries. So we can attach libraries to our project. And last but by no means least, settings so that we can modify the XML file. There we go. And then help, we're going to have documentation, because that's just typical. Video tutorials, even though they're not, well, this is not going to be the basis of video tutorials for RPGFL edit, just so that you are aware. We're going to have check for updates here, and yes, this is going to be a free editor for those of you who may be asking otherwise. And about, let people know what the hell this is going on, what the hell's going on here. Yes. Eventually when I get my order of words correct. Okay, so we've pretty much got the menus done. There's no shortcuts yet. I'll do that outside of recording because there's no point in showing you. Although if you want to set a shortcut, it is pretty easy. Scroll down to shortcut keys here, modifiers, Control Shift and Alt, and then you just select one of them from a thing. Yeah, just like that. Yeah, it's pretty easy. WinForms is the easiest editor to use. It's as simple as that. Visual Studio is... Let me try that again. WinForms is very easy to create forms using Visual Studio. I didn't really get that right either. Nevertheless, let's move on, shall we? Let's move on. So, what do I want to do? First of all, I think let's actually go into some code. That might be a good idea. So, the way in which we're going to be displaying, the graphics and stuff like that is via the use of GDI plus. I'm not going to be using anything fancy like DirectX or anything. There's no point. It's just going to be GDI plus. So I'm just going to create myself a GDI canvas, right? And we're going to be taking control of the paint event, which is here. And it eventually works. I am double clicking, right? Yes. Okay, there we go. So, in here, we are going to have lots of GDI objects. How are we going to do that, you might ask? So, I'm going to create myself an interface. That is going to be of GDI objects, or iGDI drawable, let's say. iGDI drawable. And all that is going to do is contain absolutely nothing whatsoever, just an identifier to tell the GDI canvas that yes, we are adding a GDI control to this canvas and we want to redraw it. That's all it's going to identify. It's just a clever trick to use. So, now you're probably wondering why I would want to do that. I'll show you in a moment. I will show you in a moment. So, I'm going to create a public list, which is going to be objects. We are going to initialize that list. So I'm just going to say new list of type iGDI drawable. And when we go ahead and create a class, which is going to be GDI base, which you can probably imagine is going to be the basis for all drawing routines, we are going to implement that iGDI drawable, right? So that makes sense. Thing is, there's no drawing routines in iGDI drawable. So how's it going to work? I'll show you in a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say public void draw. I'm going to take graphics, which first of all, before I can do that, is I am going to need to use the drawing namespace. I'm going to put in graphics here, like that, and we're going to set up a few properties. So I'm going to say public float x. It's just going to have a get and set. Public float y, get and set. Width. Oops, was not meant to do that. And we're going to have obviously a height as well. Okay, so that is literally all we're going to do for that. And in here I'm just going to say g.draw rectangle, and we are going to say new pens or pens, and we're going to say a new, just going to pass in x, y, width and height, which eventually gets converted to integers anyway once it's drawn. So how is this actually going to work? So if I wanted to add this object, right, new GDI base, and I said I wanted to place that object at, let's say, 30 by 30, and also make the width, let's say, 100, and the height 75, right? But we can't just go iterate through it and say, okay, I want to draw this. That's not how it works. No. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an extension where every time this object list is going to be added, every time we add an object, we are going to repaint the object, right? So instead of going through the extension part, let me ignore the fact that I mentioned extensions. That's not what I meant. So I'm just gonna say private void redraw, right? Or actually no, I'm gonna say public void or ball to, let's say, represent whether or not the object was added successfully, and then say add object, right? So now what I want to do is say GDI drawable object. What are you doing? Oh, I can't do that, can I? That's an identifier. Can't do that. Right. And when I hate Visual Studio sometimes. Work. Jesus Christ. Sometimes the indentation in Visual Studio can really annoy me. Right. So when we do that, what we're going to do is we're going to say objects.add. We're going to pass in obj, and then we're going to invalidate the control in order to obviously invalidate. Then we're just going to say return true because we know that the object was added successfully once we invalidate it. So when we go into each of these objects, what we're going to do is instead we're going to redraw. So instead of actually iterating through it, I'm just going to say public or private void redraw, right? I'm going to pass in the graphics. So I'm going to say redraw. I'm going to pass in e.graphics so that we can expose the graphics device from this particular context. And then we are going to iterate through each of those objects for each var obj in objects. And what I now want to do is I want to know if I've done that incorrectly. GGI base. I want to know if obj implements this interface, right? So I want to know if a GDI object implements that base. So how do I do that? I just do if obj is I GDI draw, right? And if it is, then what we want to do, we want to do a get type. No, we don't. We can just say obj draw. That's all we need to do. That's not what I was talking about there. Okay, so that's practically all that's going to do. So now that we've got this objects.add thing, I'm just going to take that out, remove this. I'm going to go into main form. I'm just going to quickly build it. All should be fine. I'm going to drag a canvas onto here. I'm going to dock it to show you. Okay, and then just call it canvas for the time being. And when I load this form, so when we load it, we're going to say canvas.addObject new GDI base, like that. So let's take a look and see if that works. And it does. So the reason why we have this implemented interface and all that sort of stuff, the reason why is because we could have GDI objects that doesn't implement from this. The reason why is because I want to know the difference between pure data and stuff that's rendering on the screen. I want to be able to understand the difference between that, and in order to distinguish it, I can say, okay, I can tell if a GDI object is drawable or not just by identifying whether or not this is implementing iGDI drawable, if that makes sense. So that's a good way of just simply implementing an interface. That's one of the ways in which you can use an interface, which in my opinion is one of the reasons why you would want to use one. So now that we've got that out of the way, what I want to do is now say I want to and this is public. Maybe I should make that private. It probably makes more sense. Sorry about that. Okay. So we've got our objects, and that is pretty much it for the time being. What I would like to do is now be able to export those objects into JSON format. So as I was mentioning with the interfaces bit, we could use another interface to determine whether or not this can be exported as JSON, which in my opinion is actually probably a good idea that we do that. iExportable. That's not a interface, that's a class. What am I doing? Interface. There we go. And by default they are internal, which means that it can only be used within the scope of this application. So what I now want to do is I want to say, okay, let's go back to GDI base. I want to implement iGDI, no, iExportable, because I want to be able to export the X, Y, width and height. Now, because they're properties and this object is also contains a method, we can't just export it directly. So we're going to have to use reflection in order to actually create another object which can then be exported to JSON, because unfortunately that's not how JSON works. JSON is very sensitive when it comes to object properties in .NET, and that it depends on what JSON parser you use. The JSON parser that I use, which is in assemblies, is down here, system.web.helpers. Where is it? Oh wait, no, it's in extensions. What am I doing? System.web.helpers, which is here, and it gives you helpers such as JSON in order to implement the ability to obviously export JSON, right? So it's in system.web.helpers, and then you've got a few things in here. So JSON.decode and encode, right? That particular implementation, which is Microsoft's implementation, is that the only things that can be reflected and parsed using that is objects that don't have any functions in whatsoever. And because GDI base has a function called draw or method, whatever you want to call it, it won't export. It will refuse to export, it won't like it, and it will come up with an error. I can even show you. So if I were to, let's say, public string export, right? So what I want to do is I want to encode the results of each object within this array. So I'm just going to say return JSON.encode. Just going to return string. I'm going to pass in objects, right? So that's all that's going to do. So if I were to now go into main form, right, and I said I wanted to, let's just click on, so if we click on, let's say, open, for example, obviously this is just example code. If I were to click on open, and then say, okay, canvas dot export, so I want to export that and store it somewhere. Let's put it into contents, let's say. Now this is just going to break. First of all, I can't do it without modifying a few things. So if I go into debug here, scroll down, disable the Visual Studio host, because that'll what that does is it prevents the JSON implementation within .NET from interfacing with the application that we're using. So if I were to click on open, it doesn't actually do anything. Okay, let's take a look. Let's say message box.show. So let's say I want to show the contents. That should not have worked. Oh. Is that new? Well, it normally doesn't work anyway. But apparently it does in this case, which is really weird actually. I've never seen that done before. Maybe it's because it only accepts it if it's void. Maybe it ignores it if it's void. But if you're returning a value, maybe that's why. Hang on. I'm just going to use a random test case. Some random stuff. Yes, return some random stuff. Just as a test case. Interesting. Huh. I've never wow, okay. Maybe they improved it since I last used it. Who knows? Who knows? Well, never mind. We don't need to use reflection in the end. It just works. Okay. Well, I'm good with that. Thanks, .NET, for fixing it, I suppose. So, yeah. I'm not going to continue rambling on about JSON forever, so let's continue. Let's go back to our main form, and now what we want to do is create some more objects. Now, obviously with interfaces, even though if I were to, let's say, create a class which is going to be GDI rect, for example, right, which is going to be inheriting from GDI base for obvious reasons. Also, that should be a virtual. So what we're now going to do is in GDI rect, before I move on to say that actually, GDI rect is not, it does not implement iGDI drawable, and it is not exportable. Don't even need that anymore. Think about it. Actually, no. I've got a better idea. No, let's go to our cycle bin and restore that actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, that's probably a good idea. Exportable, there's restore selected items, not all of them. Jesus. Okay. Refresh. No. Show all files. Including project. There we go. Right. Yeah. So instead of actually, so we'll say that it is in fact exportable, and what I will do is, if we go down to export, instead of actually encoding those objects, we'll actually iterate through those, create a new list, and put whatever is exportable into that list. So let's just quickly do that. So let's just say var exportable is equal to a new list of GDI base, right? So for each var obj and objects, we are going to say if obj is exportable, then we're going to say exportable.add obj. And instead of encoding the objects, we're going to encode the exportable instead. So everything that's exportable, we're going to encode. So at least that way we can now distinguish between what we can render and what we believe we can export, right? So that should hopefully make some sense to you. Now, I'm not going to continue for too much longer, so I'm going to stop here for the time being. I hope you enjoyed watching this, well, whatever this was. And yeah, I will see you next time. Maybe I'll come up with a name for this series at some point. So yes, once again, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.